Hello and welcome to this week's video on My Hero Academia. This week I'm reviewing episode 4 of volume 2 of Vigilantes. You know the rules and so do I. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below and you will be ready in next week's show. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, favourite, subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creators today, you'll do them a power of good. And be sure to subscribe to the channel, as many wonderful people have done over the past week or so. We're very close to breaking 90 subscribers and it would be great if we could do that soon. But with all that said and done, let us get on to the review. I'd have to say that as we start off, as we always do with the positives, the headlines for this review are that I enjoyed it quite a bit, and it was very much a very meat and potatoes kind of episode. Just really kind of standard and really just kind of typical for what this series has been known for over the past few episodes or so, but it was well done for it was, though I do wish it had a little bit more seasoning. Sorry for all the food-related analogies, it's close to lunchtime and I've not had lunch yet. To actually get onto the topic at hand, I have to say that I did enjoy the story that we had this week. We're very much back to the core story of the investigations into Trigger, the stuff with Bee and her shenanigans, and after the past couple weeks being considered filler by certain commentators and reviewers, or at least they no doubt will be, that I can't help but feel that it will be doubly the case as a result of this week's episode, because we are definitely back into the main story territory. So the stuff that we've had last week, even though I would argue that it isn't filler, will be considered filler, because for whatever reason, anything that isn't directly advancing the main story in these days that we live in seems to be considered filler, even if in reality it does develop the characters and foreshadows to future events, but that is a rant for a whole other time. Most of this episode was focused around this core fight sequence between Crawler and his friends versus the Crystal Rock guy, which is stuff that I will discuss in a little bit more detail shortly, but I have to say that the action sequence itself, or sequences as it was done over several panels, or rather several pages, was presented well enough. I will admit that it wasn't quite as spectacular as much of a spectacle as I really hoped it would be, because let's face it, I have to say that thus far there's been some really great action sequences thus far in Vigilantes. The past few episodes have been really great for that, and this week it was fairly standard, but it did the job for what it was. I just wish that there was something else here to really knock it up to the next level. I don't have an issue per se with episodes that are mostly centered around a core action sequence, but I am less concerned about that and more forgiving of it if the action sequence itself is good and is visually interesting, which itself, regretfully, isn't the case. And part of this is down to the fact that I really do wish that they just had a new villain, to be honest with you. There really isn't a good reason to just bring back the same villain that we've had in the previous episode, bearing in mind that they weren't that memorable to begin with. They were just a loud, punchy, shouty gorilla of a man, and that's just about it. They could literally have just done the same concept but with a slightly different design, or just made something new. It kind of feels a bit lazy. There is kind of an explanation as to why that villain's back again, but I really don't understand it. One, because it doesn't feel terribly clear, and B, because it really feels kind of stupid. Oh, the guy, that was only his first offence, thus he wasn't taken in. Yeah, bullshit, you know that he was a willing participant and all that stuff. He should have been locked up, but hey-ho, diddly-do, let's avoid this plot hole whilst it's here. I suppose that, in the end of the day, it really doesn't matter who was fighting, whether it was going to be a new villain or not, because at the end of the day, this whole sequence of events just exists just to introduce our new vigilante, Stendhal, another knockoff design of the American comic book character. Deadshot, Deathstroke, something like that. I'll be honest, I'm not that familiar with DC characters. I know it is a DC character. I say that. It might be a Marvel one. I really don't know. But again, it's another nod to American comic book characters, which is fine. This one feels a little more of a serious thing versus the knockoff X-Men characters who are again back this week and kind of have a fun little moment. It's been nice that we haven't seen them quite as frequently recently. Though I will say that with regards to Stendhal, there is this little voice in the back of my head that's worrying that this guy might be revealed to be an earlier version of the hero killer Stain. Because they both have a very unique vision of what justice is. They both use very similar looking katanas, so I suppose there's only so many ways that you can draw a katana. And if that is the case, that gives me a bad feeling that we're going to get some kind of really iffy, sympathy for the devil kind of crap. I will be honest, I'm not a fan of the hero killer Stain, and I really don't buy the, oh, Stain's actually right when you think about it stuff. Because technically, in a way that he is, but in the broadest sense of the word, he's right, and only very loosely, and his solution to it is the worst possible solution possible, especially bearing in mind what we know about Tenya's brother, as we saw of him only a couple of weeks ago, and knowing where all that goes in the main series, kind of just further implicates the fact that the hero killer Stain really isn't a guy you want to be saying is right, but that's a rant for a whole of a time. Still, whether or not that will be the case, I really don't know. There's a part of me that just desperately hopes and prays that this guy will be his own unique original character, and it won't be some kind of very heavy-handed connection to the main series. Because that's something I really don't like about prequels, is when they go out their way to make these connections to what's happening in the main series. Like, there's certain things of it, you have to do that because, you know, you share characters with it, but after a certain point, as I've mentioned in the past, it feels like the I was your father's cousin's brother's former roommate. It all feels a little bit too coincidental for my liking. And the only way that something like this would work is if you were to recontextualise who Stain is, which I really don't think that you can do. At least without making what makes Stain an interesting character less interesting, but we're getting very much off the topic and very much off the script. Of course, in this episode we see the return of that guy from the first episode. You know, the one that I thought was going to end up becoming some kind of recurring character and kind of a rival to Crawler, but then didn't because they were dispatched almost as quickly as they arrived in the second episode. Well, they're back, and I really don't know how to feel about all of that, to be honest with you. Like, there's a part of me that is glad that they're back, because, again, I thought that they would have made a great rival to Crawler, but ultimately didn't. So to get them back means that they get their time to shine and to go down that path again. But at the same time, there's a part of me that kind of feels as though we've gone beyond that now. We've kind of left them in the past. Though with that said, in the context of reading this as a manga, if you were to read it on a more logical time frame, or to see this as an anime, it would feel like no time at all and feel like a logical conclusion to bring them back in. We need to remember that I've been reading these over a far longer period of time than most people would have, because of the midway point where I was doing the what if videos and what have you. But still, it's kind of good to see them back again. I'll be interested to see exactly what they do with them, because I'll be honest, you don't really do much with them in this particular episode. They're just kind of there. We get a little bit of uncomfortable banter between him and Popstep, and that's just about it. It definitely feels like they're teasing something bigger for the next episode. Especially the singing as we get that shot of Stendhal looking over pictures that he's taken from the villain that he's just offed, and there's a picture of this guy, and I suppose he'll think that he's part of all this instant villain stuff and tried to kill him to be sure, just to be sure, I should say, and that totally would be keeping within things if it was Stain, it has to be said, because he has a very odd sense of justice. He's like a mixture between Rorschach and Judge Dredd, but crap on both levels. Good God. I will say, though, and this is slightly a bit of a negative, so I don't know if I should, you know, let's just include this as a negative, so let us go into the negatives. And this is a minor one, but I will mention it. I have no idea what a senpai is. And I will admit that whatever it means at the end of the day is kind of meaningless. The thing that I have issue with is the fact that it just kind of highlights to me with this particular manga is that the translations are really inconsistent. Like, sometimes they'll just awkwardly print over where Japanese text would be, like the business card or the side of the van or whatever. It should have Japanese text on it, but they've airbrushed over it and put something in English, but it just looks like they used the first font that they could find. Okay, that looks kind of lame, but whatever. Sometimes you'll have it where the Japanese text is still there, but they'll have the translation for it within the margins of the text, which again is fine if a little bit messy. But here is a case where they just don't bother at all. I know that for people that read anime and manga more frequently, they know what this kind of thing is. They know what a senpai is. But for someone who just doesn't have any kind of connection with this whole sub-community, I have no idea what that is. And they make such a deliberate point of what that means that it feels a little bit confusing for me. I'm hesitant to do the whole Stan Lee thing of you need to treat every comic like it's someone's first comic, but with stuff like this, when you're using turns of phrase that belong to a whole other language, it probably would have been nice if you just had a quick little summary thing in the margins, as they do so many times with this fucking anime, this fucking manga, I mean. Like the sheer number of times it feels like, oh, we've forgotten something in the main text. We've accidentally done a plot hole. Ooh, let's just have a little cute little face saying, oh, that doesn't matter. Oh, I told them earlier. Or whatever. Like, for goodness sake, guys, really. To actually get into an official, actual proper negative that actually is part of my script, I have to say that this is a very standard episode. It is very much in the format of all the others that we've had up to this point, with a few exceptions. There's a part of me that worries that this is kind of like a monkey's paw thing. I had hoped that when it came to reading Vigilantes that we would see more vigilante action, we'd see more of that kind of thing, because that's something that we really didn't get with My Hero Academia. Like the whole academia part of My Hero Academia just kind of stopped meaning anything after the whole school festival stuff. And then after that kind of area, it just became fairly standard anime stuff, and I had a similar kind of feeling when I was watching Fire Force. All the firefighting monk stuff stopped being a thing after episode 3, and now this is a kind of this isn't the case here, but what we end up getting is something that kind of feels terribly repetitive. We're just seeing the exact same flow of events time and time and time again, and the more interesting stuff as to how you balance being a vigilante whilst having a part-time job and being a student just isn't touched upon at all, and I really wish it would do. And for the love of God, if this ever does become an anime, I hope there's some filler stuff to break up these events. Otherwise, this is going to start feeling pretty oppressive when we get functionally the same episode 5 times on the bounce. With all that said, however, to get into the overview, I have to say that it is a fine episode overall. Very standard, very typical, but it does everything it needs to. There's enough thrilling action and fun little character moments to make it interesting. I do feel that this episode does suffer, however, because of the fact it does feel like it is just setting up for future plot threads. There's a lot of setup here, and there's not a lot of payoff, which will come in the next episode, which is totally understandable. But you can always counteract that feeling by just having the rest of the stuff being more interesting. Even just having a new villain that our heroes could have fought would have at least have been something, which is regrettably what we don't get here. With all that said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! Now it's time for Comment Corner, and we have once again a comment from Big X1 who says, I like this one a lot. I like seeing Crawler really has been Mr. Nice Guy even before the vigilante thing started. And I agree that it was good to learn more about Popstep. I think she's cool, but I was always disappointed that up until now, we didn't get to learn much about her. Thank you for your comment. I have to agree, it was nice to see a little bit more about Crawler, how he really had earned the nice guy moniker, even if I do wish that we had seen a little bit more of him just doing other things than that. Because especially bearing in mind, as I said in last week's review, there is a point where it kind of feels like he's nice to a fault and nice to a fault in a cartoonish, I don't believe this sense. And it was good to learn a little bit more about Popstep. I hope that we do get to learn a bit more about her in the not too distant future. As that episode, whilst I do worry that some people might end up calling it filler, I really do like the character development it has done for her. I just want to see more of that. I want to see more of our characters, learning more about what makes them tick. We are still in very early days about all of this stuff. We're only like in episode 8 or so, if we were to look at this as an anime. So that's still very early days. I just hope that when and if this does become an anime, we do have more stuff to pad this out. Filler is not a bad thing and should never be considered a bad thing. It's only a bad thing when it really is just a case of people standing in a field shouting at each other for the entire episode's runtime, was often the case with Dragon Ball Z because they've overshot the manga. Here you don't have to do that, but you can always do that to pad stuff out and to elaborate on things that you didn't have time to within the manga. The manga, the source text, should never be treated as a holy text, in my opinion. Stuff can and should be altered and changed in adaptation, but that is a whole other discussion for a whole other time. What do you think about this particular episode? Let me know in the comment section down below, and you will be read out in next week's show. Beyond all that, do the regular, normal stuff that you expected to do with these videos. Like, subscribe, click the bell, and do all that kind of YouTube stuff. Again, I really would like to break 90 subscribers by the end of the year. Maybe even 100, that would be fantastic. but given how YouTube at the moment is promoting a video that I did nearly a decade ago, and that seems to be screwing over my reach at the moment, we'll soon see about that. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!